You're scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m. watching women half your age talk about their skincare routines, their morning rituals, their self-care Sundays, and something inside you twists. Maybe it's envy, maybe it's exhaustion, or maybe it's just the quiet recognition that no amount of jade rollers and affirmations will fix what's actually broken. You've tried everything: the gratitude journals, the meditation apps, the expensive creams promising to turn back time. And still, when you look in the mirror, you see someone who's fading, not from age, but from something deeper, something you can't name but feel in your bones. And without words, something ancient awakens in your awareness. If I can't find the source of what's draining me, I'll keep disappearing no matter what I do. This is what Max Weber called the disenchantment of the world, and it's destroying women in ways that have nothing to do with aging. When Weber wrote about disenchantment in the early 1900s, he was describing what happens when a society trades magic for metrics, meaning for efficiency, soul for systems. He watched as the Protestant work ethic transformed Western civilization into a machine obsessed with productivity, where everything that once held mystery, beauty, spontaneity, got rationalized into procedures and measurements. The sacred became secular, the mystical became mundane, and the feminine, with all its intuitive, cyclical, nonlinear wisdom, became something to be controlled, optimized, and ultimately erased. What Weber observed in factories and churches: you're living in your bathroom mirror and your calendar app and your endless to-do list. You're not just tired. You're living in a world that has systematically stripped away everything that makes a woman radiant, and then sold you products to fix the symptoms while ignoring the cause. Let me show you what's really happening. There are women who glow not because of their genetics or their budget, but because they've found something that Weber said was nearly impossible in the modern world. They've re-enchanted their existence in the middle of a culture designed to drain them. They've discovered the hidden pathways back to radiance that don't involve buying anything, achieving anything, or becoming anything other than what they already are. And today I'm going to reveal how they did it, because the secret isn't what the beauty industry wants you to believe. It's not about looking younger. It's about recovering something ancient that modernity stole from you before you even knew it was missing. Before we go deeper, I need you to do something. Look back at the last 6 months of your life. Think about the moments when you felt truly alive. Not productive, not accomplished, not validated by likes or compliments, but genuinely radiant from the inside out. How many can you count? 3? 2? None? Now write in the comments, "I'm ready to find my radiance again." Don't just think it, write it. Because acknowledging what's been lost is the first step to reclaiming it. And your comment might give someone else permission to admit they're fading too. We're not alone in this. We're just trained to suffer it in silence. Weber understood something that most people miss about disenchantment. It's not that the world lost its magic because of science or progress. It's that we chose efficiency over enchantment. We chose rationalization over relationship. We chose control over mystery. And women, more than anyone, absorbed the cost of that choice because feminine energy is fundamentally incompatible with the rationalized world Weber described. Think about what femininity actually is at its core. It's cyclical, not linear. It's intuitive, not logical. It's relational, not transactional. It's receptive, not aggressive. Every single one of these qualities is a threat to the Protestant work ethic that Weber said built modern capitalism. Your body moves in cycles, menstrual, seasonal, energetic, but the world demands you show up the same every single day. Your intuition speaks in whispers and symbols, but the world only values what can be measured and proven. Your relational nature wants depth and presence, but the world rewards speed and scalability. Your receptivity needs space and stillness, but the world glorifies hustle and grind. You're not failing at being a woman. You're being asked to abandon womanhood to survive in a disenchanted world, and then you're being sold creams and courses to fix the exhaustion that abandonment creates. Weber called this the iron cage of rationality, and women are locked in it more completely than men ever were, because women aren't just participants in the system. They're expected to be the system and transcend it simultaneously. You're supposed to be productive like a man, beautiful like a model, nurturing like a saint, and accomplished like a CEO, all while pretending it's effortless and never asking for help. And when you crack under that impossible equation, You're told the problem is your resilience, your boundaries, your morning routine. Nobody tells you the problem is that you're trying to thrive in a paradigm specifically designed to drain everything feminine out of you and replace it with a mechanized version of success. Weber saw this coming. He warned that rationalization would create a world where people could have all the comfort and none of the meaning, all the efficiency and none of the enchantment. He didn't live to see Instagram, but he would recognize it immediately. The perfectly curated lives, the optimized routines, the quantified self. Women performing radiance while feeling empty, because they've been taught that radiance is something you achieve through products and discipline, not something you already are when you stop abandoning yourself to meet external standards. But here's where it gets interesting. Weber also identified something he called charisma, a quality that breaks through rationalized systems. It's not charm or likability. It's an authentic power that emerges when someone is connected to something larger than the system, something that can't be bought or manufactured or optimized. And throughout history, the most radiant women weren't the ones following the rules of their time. They were the ones who found ways to stay connected to the source of their power, even when their culture demanded they disconnect from it. They didn't glow because they had better genetics or easier lives. They glowed because they refused to accept disenchantment as inevitable. And they developed practices, not skincare routines, actual spiritual and psychological practices that allowed them to maintain enchantment in a world trying to drain them. Weber studied religious communities and found that groups who maintained rituals, even small ones, were able to resist complete rationalization. They created pockets of meaning in a meaningless world. And radiant women do the same thing whether they realize it or not. Let me show you the 4 types of women Weber's framework helps us understand, and why only one type maintains true radiance in a disenchanted world. Type 1. The optimized woman. This is the woman who believes the lie that rationalization offers. She tracks everything: her calories, her steps, her water intake, her screen time, her sleep quality, her productivity minutes. She has routines for her routines. She color codes her calendar and meal preps on Sundays and never misses her 5 a.m. workout. On the surface, she looks like she has it together. But if you look closely, you'll see someone who's becoming a machine. She's efficient, yes, but she's also exhausted. She's disciplined, absolutely. But she's also disconnected from her body's actual needs because she's overridden them with systems and schedules. Weber would call this the ultimate victory of rationalization. The person becomes the system. They internalize the iron cage so completely they don't even realize they're trapped. This woman thinks she's being responsible, but she's actually abandoned herself to an algorithm. And the cost shows up as chronic anxiety, mysterious health issues, emotional numbness, and a creeping sense that despite doing everything right, she feels fundamentally wrong. She's not radiant. She's running on fumes and calling it discipline. Type 2, the reactive woman. She sees the problem with the optimized woman and swings completely the other direction. She rejects all structure, all discipline, all systems. She lives by her feelings and her flow and her intuition, which sounds spiritual but often becomes its own form of imprisonment. Weber warned about this too. He called it romantic irrationalism, the belief that if you just reject all the rules, you'll be free. But freedom without structure isn't liberation. It's chaos. This woman burns out just as fast as the optimized woman, but in a different way. She starts projects and abandons them. She makes commitments and breaks them. She feels deeply but can't sustain anything because she's defined herself entirely in opposition to rationalization without building anything in its place. She mistakes inconsistency for authenticity. She confuses impulse with intuition. And she ends up just as exhausted as the woman following all the rules, except now she also carries shame about her inability to stick with anything. She's not radiant either. She's flickering, bright one moment and dark the next, because she's trying to live on inspiration alone without the container to hold it. Type 3, the adaptive woman. This is the most common type, and the most invisible. She's learned to shape-shift depending on what's demanded of her. At work she's sharp, rational, efficient, everything the system rewards. At home she tries to be soft, nurturing, present, everything feminine is supposed to be. With her partner, she performs desire even when she feels nothing. With her friends, she performs having it all together even when she's falling apart. She's not optimized and she's not chaotic. She's simply disappeared beneath the weight of all the roles she's playing. Weber would recognize her immediately. She's participating in what he called the iron cage through compliance, not belief. She doesn't think the system works. She just doesn't think there's an alternative. And over time, this constant adaptation doesn't just exhaust her, it erases her. She stops knowing who she is beneath the masks. She stops feeling her own desires beneath the expectations. She looks in the mirror and sees a stranger who's competent and useful and completely empty. This is not radiance. This is the slow death of the self in service to a disenchanted world. Type 4. The radiant woman. And then there's the woman who found the secret that Weber himself hinted at but never fully named, because he was studying systems and she's living beyond them. She's not optimized, but she has discipline. She's not reactive, but she trusts her intuition. She's not adaptive, but she knows how to navigate the world without disappearing into it. What makes her different? She's reconnected to what Weber called the charismatic source, the wellspring of power that exists before and beneath all rationalized systems. She's re-enchanted her life not by rejecting modernity completely, but by creating sacred pockets within it. She knows that the disenchanted world wants to colonize every moment of her day, so she guards certain hours, certain practices, certain relationships as non-negotiable sources of meaning. She has rituals, real ones, not Instagram aesthetic routines. Rituals that connect her to something larger than herself, whether that's nature, creativity, spirituality, or simply her own deep knowing. She understands her cycles and honors them instead of overriding them. She knows when she's in a season of expansion and when she's in a season of rest, and she stops trying to be spring when she's actually winter. She has boundaries that protect her energy not as selfishness but as sacred responsibility. She knows that her radiance isn't something she produces through effort, it's something that emerges when she stops draining herself dry. And most importantly, she's developed what Weber called theodicy of suffering, the ability to find meaning even in the difficult seasons without spiritually bypassing them or collapsing under them. She doesn't glow because life is easy. She glows because she's maintained connection to the source even when everything around her is trying to sever that connection. Weber identified 3 pillars that allow charismatic power to survive in rationalized systems, and radiant women, consciously or unconsciously, live by all 3. Pillar 1, protected time for the non-rational. Weber observed that communities who maintained enchantment always had designated times that were exempt from productivity demands. The Sabbath, holy days, seasonal festivals. These weren't leisure time. They were sacred time, protected from the encroachment of work and rationalization. Radiant women do this too. They have non-negotiable time that is not for producing, achieving, or optimizing. It might be Sunday mornings that are just for slow coffee and reading. It might be Friday evenings that are just for baths and silence. It might be the first hour after waking that belongs to meditation or journaling or simply being before the demands begin. This isn't self-care as the culture sells it, some luxury you earn after you've done enough. This is theological resistance. This is saying that not every moment of your existence can be colonized by the rational world. And the women who maintain this sacred time don't just feel better. They glow differently because they're not running on fumes. They're connected to an actual source. Pillar 2, embodied ritual. Weber found that disenchantment happened partly because religious practices became intellectualized and lost their embodied sensory dimensions. The Protestant Reformation stripped away incense, iconography, chanting, everything that engaged the body and the senses. It made religion cerebral and rational, and in doing so, it made it less powerful. Radiant women have found their way back to embodied ritual, and it doesn't have to be religious. It's lighting a candle before writing. It's touching the earth before going inside. It's dancing alone in her kitchen to music that moves her. It's taking a bath with intention, not efficiency. It's cooking a meal as an act of love, not just fuel. These small, repetitive, embodied acts create what anthropologists call liminal space, a threshold between the ordinary and the sacred. And when you cross that threshold regularly, you carry the glow of it back into the disenchanted world. You become someone who lives in 2 realities simultaneously, the rationalized world and the enchanted one. And that duality is what creates radiance. You're not trapped in the iron cage. You know the way out. Pillar 3. Community of the initiated. Weber understood that charismatic movements don't survive through individuals alone. They need communities of people who recognize and validate the enchantment together. This is why religious communities maintained their power, even as the broader culture rationalized. They created spaces where people could experience the non-rational together without shame. Radiant women find or create these communities. It might be a circle of women who gather monthly, not to network, but to witness each other's truth. It might be an online space, where depth is valued over performance. It might be a single friend who sees you, really sees you, and doesn't need you to be anything other than what you are. These relationships aren't transactional. They're not about what you can offer or achieve. They're about mutual recognition of the sacred in each other, and that recognition becomes a mirror that reflects back your own radiance when you've forgotten it exists. Weber called this collective effervescence, the energy that emerges when people come together around something meaningful. And women who have this in their lives glow differently because they're not carrying the burden of enchantment alone. They're part of a living tradition of resistance against disenchantment. But Weber also warned about 3 dangers that destroy charisma and drain radiance. And if you're not aware of them, you'll fall into them without realizing. Danger 1. Routinization. Weber observed that charismatic movements almost always get routinized over time. The spontaneous becomes scheduled, the sacred becomes systematic, the magical becomes mechanical, and what was once a source of life becomes another obligation. This happens to women constantly. You start a practice that feels alive, maybe journaling or yoga or time in nature, and it transforms you. But then it becomes a routine. You feel guilty if you skip it. You do it even when it feels dead. You turn it into another item on your to-do list, another way to optimize yourself. And suddenly, the practice that was supposed to reconnect you to yourself becomes another source of disconnection. Weber would say this is inevitable unless you consciously resist it. The moment a ritual stops feeling alive, you have to be willing to let it die or transform it. Radiance requires flexibility. It requires allowing your practices to evolve as you evolve, not clinging to forms that have lost their power. If your morning routine feels like a cage, it's become routinized. Let it go and listen for what wants to emerge instead. Danger 2. Commodification. This is the most insidious danger in modern capitalism. Weber saw how quickly charismatic movements got co-opted by market forces. The sacred becomes a product. The spiritual becomes an industry. And suddenly you're buying your enchantment instead of generating it. The wellness industry has done this perfectly. They've taken every ancient practice that women once did for free, in community, as part of their natural lives, and turned them into products you have to purchase. Meditation becomes an app subscription. Herbalism becomes expensive supplements. Sisterhood becomes paid retreats. Movement becomes boutique fitness classes. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of these things, but if you believe you need to buy enchantment, you've already lost it. Radiant women know the difference between investing in support and outsourcing their power. They'll pay for a teacher who helps them access their own wisdom, but they won't pay for a system that makes them dependent on continued consumption. They understand that real enchantment can't be purchased because it's not a commodity. It's a relationship with reality that no amount of money can manufacture. If your radiance requires a budget, it's not radiance. It's another form of the iron cage with better marketing. Danger 3. Spiritual materialism. Weber would call this the Protestant work ethic infiltrating even your spiritual life. It's when you turn your inner work into another achievement project. You're not seeking enlightenment for its own sake. You're seeking it to be better, more successful, more impressive. You meditate so you can be more productive. You do shadow work so you can have better relationships. You heal your trauma so you can manifest more abundance. On the surface, this sounds reasonable, but it's actually the iron cage claiming even your soul. You've turned your spiritual life into another optimization project where the goal is still performance, just dressed in spiritual language. Radiant women have transcended this completely. They do their inner work not to become better, but to become truer. They're not trying to fix themselves. They're trying to remember themselves. They know that radiance isn't something you earn through spiritual achievement. It's something that emerges when you stop abandoning yourself to meet someone else's standards, including spiritual ones. This is the hardest danger to see because it masquerades as growth. But real growth doesn't make you more acceptable. It makes you more yourself, which often makes you less acceptable to a disenchanted world. And that's exactly the point. Weber studied history and found that societies go through cycles of disenchantment and re-enchantment, and we can see this pattern in individual women's lives too. Let me show you 4 women whose stories reveal these patterns and what we can learn from each. The case of Martha, the rationalized burnout. Martha was 42 when she came to understand what was draining her. She had the perfect life on paper. Successful career in tech, beautiful home, 2 healthy kids, a marriage that looked functional. She did everything right. She had systems for everything: meal planning, exercise schedules, family calendars, financial spreadsheets. Her life was optimized down to the minute. But she couldn't explain why she started having panic attacks in grocery store aisles, why she cried in her car before going into work, why sex felt like another task to complete, why looking at her own reflection made her feel nothing. Weber would recognize Martha's condition immediately. She had internalized the iron cage so completely that she'd become a machine in a human body. Her radiance hadn't dimmed. It had been systematically rationalized out of existence. Every spontaneous impulse was overridden by the schedule. Every intuitive knowing was ignored in favor of expert advice. Every moment of potential enchantment was colonized by productivity. Martha's breakthrough came when she stopped trying to fix herself and started questioning the paradigm. She didn't need better time management. She needed to dismantle the belief that her worth came from her efficiency. She started small, protecting Saturday mornings as completely unstructured time. No plans, no productivity, just being. At first it felt like death. She didn't know how to exist without optimizing. But slowly, something began to emerge, a quiet knowing about what she actually wanted, a reconnection to sensations she'd been ignoring for years, a tentative glow that didn't come from achievement but from simply inhabiting her own life. 2 years later, Martha looks like a different person, not because she's younger or thinner or more successful, but because she's no longer performing existence. She's living it. And that shift is what creates radiance. The case of Sophia, the reactive collapse. Sophia's story is different. She saw through the optimization trap early. She watched her mother work herself to death chasing perfection and vowed never to become that. So she rejected all of it. She quit her corporate job without a plan. She ended a stable relationship because it felt too conventional. She moved to Bali and threw herself into the spiritual scene, hoping to find the enchantment that modern life had stolen. For a while, it worked. She felt free. She felt alive. But Weber warned about this too. Romantic rejection of rationalization without any structure to replace it leads to chaos, not liberation. Sophia's life became a series of intense experiences that led nowhere. Retreats that changed her life for 3 weeks, until the insights faded. Spiritual teachers who promised transformation but delivered more confusion. Relationships that burned hot and collapsed. She was living spontaneously, yes, but she couldn't sustain anything. And underneath the freedom was a creeping despair that maybe she was broken. Maybe she was the problem. Maybe she just wasn't spiritual enough to make this work. Sophia's turning point came when she stopped seeing structure as the enemy of enchantment and started seeing it as the container. She realized that the most powerful spiritual traditions throughout history always combined mysticism with discipline, spontaneity with ritual, freedom with form. She created what Weber would call a charismatic structure, not a rigid system, but a flexible container that held space for both the rational and the non-rational. She kept morning practice non-negotiable but allowed its form to change. She maintained financial responsibility, but chose work aligned with her values. She honored her cycles instead of fighting them, and slowly her radiance stabilized. She stopped flickering and started glowing consistently, because she'd found the balance between liberation and sustainability. The case of Elena, the adaptive ghost. Elena's story is the most common and the most heartbreaking. She never chose optimization or reaction. She simply learned to disappear. As a daughter, she was whatever her parents needed. As a student, she was whatever got approval. As a professional, she was whatever the role demanded. As a partner, she was whatever kept the peace. As a mother, she was whatever her children needed. And somewhere in all that shape-shifting, Elena herself ceased to exist. She wasn't unhappy exactly. She just wasn't anything. She had no strong opinions, no clear desires, no sense of what she wanted outside of what others wanted from her. Weber would call this the complete victory of socialization over self. Elena had become a perfect citizen of the disenchanted world, useful and functional and utterly empty. What makes Elena's story so painful is that she didn't realize she was disappearing until it was almost complete. There was no dramatic crisis, no breakdown, just a slow erosion of self until one day she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back. Not because she'd aged, but because there was nobody home behind the eyes. Elena's journey back to radiance was the longest and the most difficult, because she had to discover what she'd never known in the first place, who she actually was beneath all the roles. It required what Weber called individuation, the painful process of separating your authentic self from the collective identities you've absorbed. She started therapy. She journaled relentlessly. She sat with the uncomfortable truth that she had no idea what she liked, what she wanted, what she believed when nobody was watching. And slowly, painfully, a self began to emerge. Not the self she thought she should be, the self she actually was. And that self was radiant, not because it was impressive or accomplished or even particularly special, but because it was finally, devastatingly, real. Elena learned what Weber knew. Authenticity is the only true antidote to disenchantment. When you stop performing and start being, you glow differently, because you're no longer channeling energy into maintaining a mask. All that energy becomes available as presence, and presence is what radiance actually is. The case of Miriam, the integrated woman. Miriam represents what Weber believed was possible but rare, someone who maintained charismatic power within a rationalized world, without either succumbing to it or completely rejecting it. Miriam was a doctor, deeply embedded in one of the most rationalized professions that exists. She understood systems. She valued evidence. She practiced medicine with precision and discipline. But she also understood something her colleagues had forgotten. Healing isn't purely rational. It requires presence. It requires intuition. It requires the ability to see the person beyond the symptoms. So Miriam created what Weber would call a charismatic medical practice. She saw the same number of patients her colleagues did, but she did it differently. She started each appointment with 30 seconds of silence, grounding herself in presence before engaging. She touched her patients, really touched them, a hand on the shoulder, an acknowledgement of their humanity beyond their diagnosis. She listened not just to what they said, but to what they weren't saying, the fear beneath the symptoms, the loneliness behind the complaints. Her colleagues thought she was wasting time. Her patients thought she was magic. But Miriam wasn't doing anything magical. She was simply refusing to let complete rationalization colonize the sacred act of healing. And the radiance this created in her wasn't just personal. It was contagious. Her patients left feeling seen in a healthcare system designed to make them feel like numbers. Her staff worked for her longer than anywhere else because her presence reminded them why they'd entered medicine in the first place. Miriam proved what Weber suspected. You don't have to abandon the rational world to maintain enchantment. You just have to refuse to let the rational world be the only world. You have to consciously create pockets of the sacred within the structure. And when you do that, you don't just survive disenchantment. You become a source of re-enchantment for everyone around you. So what's the difference between the women who fade and the women who glow? Weber would say it comes down to one choice, repeated 1,000 times in small moments that nobody else sees. The choice to protect your connection to the source even when everything around you is trying to sever it. The choice to honor the cycles of your body even when productivity culture demands you override them. The choice to create sacred time even when there's no time left. The choice to build rituals that connect you to something larger than yourself even when you feel ridiculous doing it. The choice to seek community that witnesses your truth even when surface-level connection is easier. The choice to let go of practices that have become dead even when you're attached to them. The choice to refuse commodification of your spirit even when buying solutions is faster. The choice to pursue authenticity even when performance is more rewarded. These choices don't make you radiant because they're impressive. They make you radiant because they keep you connected to yourself, and connection is the only thing disenchantment cannot tolerate. When you're truly connected to your source, you stop being controllable. You stop being optimizable. You stop being exploitable. And the system can't function when enough people wake up to that reality. Your radiance is not a personal achievement. It's a form of resistance. It's proof that disenchantment is not inevitable, that the iron cage has a door, that women can reclaim their power even in a world designed to drain it. Weber believed that once rationalization reached a certain point, re-enchantment became nearly impossible at the collective level. He thought we'd be trapped in the iron cage for generations. But he didn't account for women. He didn't account for the fact that femininity itself is fundamentally resistant to complete rationalization because it exists in relationship to cycles, intuition, mystery, all the things that can't be fully controlled. And throughout history, even in the most disenchanted eras, there have always been women who maintained the old knowledge, who kept the practices alive, who refused to accept that efficiency was more important than meaning. They were called witches. They were called hysterics. They were called difficult. But they were actually doing the sacred work of resistance, maintaining pathways back to enchantment, so that when the culture was ready, those pathways would still exist. You're part of that lineage whether you know it or not. Every time you choose presence over productivity, you're doing the work. Every time you honor your cycle instead of overriding it, you're doing the work. Every time you protect sacred time, you're doing the work. And every time you allow yourself to be radiant without earning it through achievement, you're doing the most radical work of all. You're proving that Weber was wrong about one thing. Disenchantment isn't permanent, it's a choice. And you can choose differently starting right now. If you've felt yourself fading, if you've looked in the mirror and wondered where you went, if you've tried all the products and all the routines and still feel empty, it's not because you're broken. It's because you've been trying to solve a spiritual problem with rational solutions. You've been trying to fix disenchantment with more optimization, when what you actually need is re-enchantment. And re-enchantment doesn't come from adding more to your life. It comes from protecting what's already sacred within it. It comes from creating boundaries around your energy so the world stops draining you dry. It comes from reconnecting to your body's wisdom instead of overriding it with expert opinions. It comes from finding or creating communities where your truth is welcomed instead of managed. It comes from developing rituals that connect you to something larger than yourself, whether that's nature, creativity, spirituality, or simply the magnificent fact of your own existence. It comes from refusing to let every moment be colonized by productivity. It comes from choosing authenticity even when performance is safer. And it comes from remembering that you are not a machine to be optimized. You're a woman with access to ancient wisdom about cycles and intuition and the sacred, and the disenchanted world needs what you carry more than you'll ever know. So here's what I want you to understand. Your radiance is not something you achieve. It's something you uncover by removing everything that's covering it up. The exhaustion, the people-pleasing, the constant shape-shifting, the belief that your worth comes from your productivity, the internalized iron cage you've been carrying without realizing it's not actually locked. Weber spent his life studying what creates and destroys enchantment in civilizations, and his answer, in the end, was always the same. Enchantment dies when we stop protecting it. It dies when we let the rational world colonize every moment. It dies when we forget that efficiency is not the same as meaning, but it can be reclaimed. Not at the collective level, maybe, not in the culture at large, but in your life, in your choices, in the small acts of resistance you perform every single day by refusing to accept that this disenchanted existence is all there is. You glow when you remember you're not meant to be a machine. You glow when you reconnect to cycles instead of fighting them. You glow when you create sacred time that belongs to no one but you. You glow when you find community that sees you, not what you produce. You glow when you stop earning your worth and start inhabiting it. And you glow when you realize that radiance was never something you lost. It was something you buried to survive, and now you get to dig it back up. If you're ready to reclaim what disenchantment stole from you, if you're done fading and ready to remember how to glow, subscribe to this channel. Because I'm not here to sell you products or give you another routine to optimize. I'm here to show you the pathways back to enchantment that Weber said were nearly impossible to find. I'm here to help you recognize the iron cage you're living in and show you where the door is. And I'm here to remind you that you're not alone in this. There are women all over the world doing this same work, refusing to accept disenchantment as inevitable, choosing to protect their radiance even when everything around them is trying to drain it. You're part of something ancient and powerful, and the world needs what you're carrying, so don't you dare let them convince you that your exhaustion is normal or that your fading is inevitable. It's not. It's a choice the culture made for you, and you get to choose differently. If this resonated with you, if you're ready to dive deeper into how Weber's insights about rationalization and charisma can help you understand the spiritual crisis of modern womanhood, you need to watch my video on Max Weber's Protestant work ethic and the secret shame of never being enough, where I reveal how the same religious transformation that created capitalism also created the specific form of anxiety that's destroying women's sense of worth. It's the missing piece that explains why achievement never feels like enough and rest always feels like failure. Go watch it now, because understanding the root is the only way to pull it out. Until we meet again in the space between the rational and the sacred.